Welcome to Starbound, where every star tells a story. Tonight, have you ever marveled at the ingenuity of humans, turning the most mundane items into tools for survival? Well, let's get into the story. In the heart of the Crack's dominion, where the narrow streets coiled like serpents through the sprawling bazaar, there existed a place called the Shimmering Scales. It wasn't a tavern in the strictest sense, no gaudy signs or brightly colored beverages, but rather a repurposed warehouse with rough-hewn tables and an ever-present haze of pungent smoke. This was where the traders came to unwind, to seal deals away from prying eyes, or simply to swap tales from the vast reaches of space. Zorak, a Crack's veteran of countless trade routes, leaned against the chip bar, his four insectoid arms nursing a mug of thick, oily liquor. The rhythmic clicking of his mandibles betrayed his unease. "I swear on the brood mother," he hissed to his companions. The human, he was the size of a hatchling. Yet, those glow bars. A Philian trader, spindly and sleek, tilted its multifaceted head. "You saw what happened on the Hyperion hub with the writing stylus?" Zorak shuddered, the iridescent scales along his back rippling in a display akin to a human shiver. The stylus, yes. Then that utensil they use for eating, the pronged one. His voice trailed off as he recalled the surprising savagery of the human, the way his eyes had blazed with an intensity that chilled Zorak to his chitinous core. Rock, a glow bar of immense size with skin the color of hammered steel, let out a low rumble of laughter. "Pronged eating utensil? Bah, give me a good fist any day." The Philian chittered, a shrill sound like nails on glass. "Humans aren't about brute force. It's cleverness, adaptability. I once heard of one who subdued an entire raiding party using only a roll of bonding tape, I believe they called it." Zorak's secondary arms twitched. He'd dealt with humans on occasion, and while frustratingly unpredictable, they were more often interested in bartering than bloodshed. Still, the incident on the hub had shaken him. "They see things differently," he rasped. "The universe, it's all just material to them, tools to make other tools, weapons to be wielded if the need arises." A low murmur rippled through the dimly lit tavern. Rock slammed his massive fist on the table, sending empty tankards rattling. "Weapon from a writing stick? Ha! Sounds like a pup's bedtime tale." "You doubt it?" hissed Zorak, his mandibles clicking in agitation. "I saw it. The glow bars were twice the human size, drunk and spoiling for a fight. But Zorak's exoskeleton vibrated, a sign of deep distress. There was this glint in their eyes, Rock, like they calculate everything, angles, weaknesses, what can hurt, what can kill. A flick of the wrist, a precise jab, and those bulky glow bars staggered back, howling more in surprise than pain. The tavern fell silent, the usual background hum of deals and gossip fading into a tense hush. Even the Philian traders, usually so quick with their quips and calculations, stilled their rustling limbs. "I heard a story once," a voice rumbled from the back, a voice as gravelly as the asteroid fields of the outer rim. All eyes turned towards a hulking figure shrouded in the shadows. A Thoraxian, his exoskeleton the color of weathered granite, his voice a low, reverberating tremor. "About a human captured by slavers. No weapons, no allies, just those soft, fleshy hands of theirs." A ripple of anticipation ran through the crowd. Thoraxians were renowned warriors, their tales of combat sung across the star lanes. If even they were intrigued by humans, then perhaps there was more to this species than met the eye. "They disassembled their cell," the Thoraxian continued, "piece by piece, turned the locking mechanism into a blade, the support bars into clubs. By the time the guards realized what was happening, the human was free, and let's just say, those slavers never traded in flesh again." Zorak clicked his mandibles nervously. "Practical, that's the word. Humans. They see the purpose of a thing even before its makers do. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What would happen if a whole swarm of them decided those blasters we trade could be something more, huh?" His secondary arms gestured vaguely towards the assortment of weaponry casually propped against tables, an unspoken reminder of the fragile balance of power in the Crack's dominion. Rock scoffed, his rumbling voice echoing against the bare stone walls. "Blasters beat writing sticks any day. Takes more than clever tricks to win a real fight. An older Filian, scales dulled with age, spoke up, its voice a raspy whisper. Cleverness wins the fight you didn't see coming, Glowbar. Humans don't start wars, not usually, but if backed into a corner. The wizened trader trailed off, swirling the last of its drink in its cup. Heard a story, a Krax with an impressive crest chimed in, about a human scout ship stranded on a world crawling with those acid-spitting bugs of Zilara Prime. No comms, low on ammo, surrounded. Thought it was the end for him. He paused, drawing out the suspense. But those humans, he continued, his voice dropping to a hushed tone, they figured out those bugs, see? Turns out their acid ain't so tough against fermented fruit. Moonshine, if you can believe it. Turned their canteens into crude bombs, lured the bugs into traps, and blasted their way right off that rock. Heard they came back home smelling like a distillery, but alive. The tavern erupted in boisterous laughter, the tension momentarily broken. Yet, a thread of unease remained. Even Rock, with all his bluster, glanced around nervously, as if expecting a human to materialize from the shadows, armed with nothing more deadly than a bottle of cheap liquor. Humans, Zorak began, his mandibles working furiously. They're relentless. They don't give up, don't back down. There's this drive in them. Once they set their minds on something, well, the galaxy itself better watch out. The Thoraxian let out a grating sound that could have been a chuckle. Perhaps that's their greatest weapon, Krax. Not the stylus or the fruit bombs, but the will to use them. A low hum of agreement spread through the tavern. The stories, initially sparking amusement, had given way to a cautious respect, even amongst the hardened traders. The image of humans, small and seemingly unremarkable, now held a strange, almost mythic quality. It's not just weapons, though, Zorak added, his tone thoughtful. They're builders, too. Saw a human crew turn a wrecked freighter into a makeshift outpost in a matter of cycles. Used the scrap metal for walls, rewired the engines to power hydroponics. He shook his head. Their minds work differently, see possibilities where the rest of us see junk. The image hung heavy in the smoky air. This wasn't just about combat prowess, but a fundamental difference in how humans interacted with the material universe. To the Krax, with their rigid hierarchies and established technologies, the idea was both unsettling and oddly inspiring. The silence was broken not by another tale, but by the metallic rasp of the tavern door sliding open. Heads jerked up, conversations stalled. A human strode in. He was average in every way. Average height, average build, clad in a worn jumpsuit that had seen better days. But in that place, at that moment, he might as well have been a titan in gleaming warplate. Every eye fixed on him, on the simple toolkit slung at his hip, on the calloused hands that could, if the stories were true, turn anything into an instrument of survival. The human seemed oblivious to the sudden tension, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on the bar. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, a flicker quickly smoothed out. Wordlessly, he raised a hand, gesturing towards the bartender. Zorak watched, his mandibles twitching. This was a test, he realized. The human wasn't picking a fight, but he wasn't backing down either. There was an unspoken question hanging in the air. Would they acknowledge the fear or offer the begrudging respect shared between wary predators? The room hung in tense anticipation. Every eye was on the human, and the human seemed to feel it without even looking their way. Yet, he didn't falter, his gaze steady on the bartender who watched him with wide eyes. Ruck, the Glowbar, let out a low growl, his massive fist clenching and unclenching. The Thoraxian shifted, the faint grinding of chitinous plates a warning. The Felians clustered closer, their rustling a chorus of nerves. The bartender, a Krax like Zorak but more weathered, visibly swallowed. He raised a chitinous arm in a shaky, universal gesture of service. What will it be? The human finally met their gaze. Something strong, he said, his voice surprisingly mild. Got anything local? Confusion replaced fear for a flicker of a second. The bartender blinked. Yes, we have a Graxflower brew in... He trailed off, mandibles clicking in an approximation of a human smile. Would you care for a sample? The tension in the room eased ever so slightly. This was a transaction, a familiar interaction across all species, and the human, apparently, just wanted a drink. Relief mingled with a faint pang of disappointment. The traders had been primed for a show, a performance of the raw human spirit they dissected all night. The human nodded, stepping toward the bar and hoisting himself with surprising agility onto a too-tall stool. Sample sounds good. Whispers flickered across the tavern as the bartender busied himself with decanting the potent brew. Rock muttered something that could have been apologetic or merely drunken grumbling. The Thoraxian settled back, his voice low. He could still make a weapon from that glass, you know. Zorak chuckled darkly. Perhaps, but perhaps he just wants to enjoy his drink. The human sipped the brew, coughed, then smiled wryly. Strong, definitely. He gestured for a full measure. I'll be here for a while. Got some repairs to do on my ship. As the human took another sip, the tavern cautiously returned to its prior buzz. Deals were whispered, boasting and playful threats exchanged. Yet the traders were subtly changed. Eyes occasionally flickered towards the lone figure at the bar, assessing the set of his shoulders, the way his fingers absently traced a worn patch on his jumpsuit. Zorak leaned back, a strange sort of admiration creeping into him. Humans were, undeniably, a dangerous lot. But there was something more to them, an odd mix of adaptability and defiance that tugged at his cracks instincts. Not respect, perhaps, but a sliver of acknowledgement. You ever think, he lowered his voice to a barely audible hiss meant only for his companions, that maybe they ain't so different from us? The Filian chittered softly. Different tools, same goal. Survive, expand, find the next profit. Its head tilted, considering. Perhaps difference lies in how high the price is, and they care to pay it beforehand. Rock snorted, but it lacked his usual bluster. He'd been the loudest about human savagery, the quickest to dismiss their ingenuity. Now, though pride prevented full admission, doubt had taken root. Images of makeshift weapons and acid-riddled bugs swirled uneasily in his mind. The Thoraxian watched the human refill his glass. There's a hunger in them, he rasped. A hunger most keep chained. We fight wars for territory, for resources. Humans, they fight for the fight itself, to exist against all odds. His stony gaze remained fixed on the unassuming figure. Dangerous, yes, but maybe, just maybe, admirable. The human, as if sensing their scrutiny, briefly raised his glass before downing the rest in one smooth motion. He paid with a scattering of glittering credits, the universal currency of the trade lanes, and slid off the bar stool with a lithe ease that belied his ordinary appearance. He crossed the tavern with a calm, unhurried stride. Every trader in the shimmering scales instinctively stood straighter, their gazes following him. The human offered no challenge, no threat. He simply walked through their midst, heading towards the exit. Yet, as he pushed through the doors, there was an unspoken understanding in the room. If this lone human was so formidable, what would happen if humanity as a whole ever turned that restless gaze on their quiet corner of the galaxy? In the days that followed, the human became a familiar sight in the shimmering scales. He appeared at odd intervals, always alone, always sipping his Graxflower brew, always paying without hassle. He spoke only when necessary, his transactions curt but polite. No fights were picked, no weapons fashioned from bar stools or cutlery. The human was, in his own unremarkable way, remarkably dull. Yet, the wariness didn't fade. In fact, his very ordinariness bred unease. There was something inherently unsettling about a being surrounded by tales of ferocity, who yet chose to simply exist among them. Zorak found himself studying the human as he tinkered with a battered toolkit at a far corner table. His movements were efficient, precise, revealing nothing of the explosive potential that supposedly lurked within him. Had they misjudged the species? Were they waiting, biding their time, planning something far more sinister than drunken brawls? Rock, surprisingly, became the most vocal about the deceptively mild human. He ain't natural, he'd growl to his crew, his bulk dominating a smaller trader's personal space. They build, they break, they twist things around. It's their nature. Don't trust him, not for a blasted second. The Filians, ever pragmatic, saw opportunity. One particularly daring trader, armed with a translation matrix and a generous dose of fermented courage, approached the human, offering a complex trade deal involving mining rights and an untested purification system. The human listened, expression unreadable, then asked one question: "Is it useful?" The Filian, caught off guard, sputtered an overly detailed explanation. The human nodded curtly. Price? Negotiations lasted less than a cycle. As the Filian scampered off to seal the deal, Zorak watched, perplexed. Were humans truly so unpredictable, swinging between calculated violence and cutthroat bartering in a heartbeat? The Thoraxian kept his distance, content to observe. He had survived countless battles, seen empires rise and fall. He instinctively understood that the human wasn't just an individual. He was a symbol of the raw, untamed potential that lurked under the thin veneer of galactic civilization, a potential that even the mighty Thoraxians might not be able to contain should it ever be unleashed. The unease festered in the shimmering scales, a low-level hum beneath the usual bustle. The traders eyed the human less with fear and more with a gnawing sense of wrongness. He broke no rules, showed no obvious aggression, yet his presence was a disruption, an unintentional reminder of their own limits, of the delicate balance of power in a galaxy teeming with the unknown. Among them, however, one reaction defied the norm. A young Krax, barely out of apprenticeship, became obsessed with the human. Unlike his elders, Kix saw not something to fear, but something to dissect, to understand. He observed the human's every move, cataloging habits and routines. He noted calluses, the way the human held himself, the faint scars half hidden under his worn jumpsuit. The Thoraxian watched Kix watching the human, and in the young Krax's eyes he saw a reflection of his own early fascination with battle. But the Thoraxian knew that what fueled Kix wasn't a warrior's spirit but a tinkerer's curiosity. One evening, when the tavern was less crowded, the Thoraxian rumbled up to Kix's table. "You study him as I once studied the battle formations of the insectoids of Rigel." The Thoraxian rasped, his powerful form casting a long shadow over the apprentice. Kix jolted, startled. There's something about him. About them," he added hastily, remembering the tales. The Thoraxian let out a grating chuckle. "There is, but not in the way the others think. You see patterns, possibilities. You want to know not how he fights, but how he thinks." Kix hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, it's illogical, perhaps. He poses no threat, yet the potential—" He trailed off, unable to find the right words. The Thoraxian rested a massive clawed hand on Kix's trembling shoulder. "Logic is knowing how to use a blaster," he said gruffly. "Wisdom is knowing when to lower the weapon. Study your human, young scholar. He may teach you far more than any of us here ever could." With the Thoraxian's subtle encouragement, Kix's fascination transformed into a quiet, methodical study. He learned the human's name, Jax, a short, sharp sound that hinted at the potential energy contained within his unremarkable frame. Kix began to understand the human's routines, the early visits to the market for fresh supplies, the meticulous tinkering with his battered ship docked on the fringes of the port, the solitary evenings in the shimmering scales. One evening, as Jax nursed his usual drink, Kix made a bold move. He approached the human's table not with fear or challenge in his stance, but with something akin to a student approaching a reclusive master. "Jax," Kix began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I wish to learn." The human raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing his otherwise stoic face. "Learn what?" "About you, your people, how you function." Kix gestured vaguely, feeling the inadequacy of words. Jax studied him for a long moment. The traders around them had frozen mid-conversation, watching the encounter unfold. Even Rock, usually boisterous, seemed to hold his breath. Finally, Jax set his empty glass down. "That's a long lesson," he said, his voice flat. "Cost you more than credits." Kix, prepared for this, reached into his satchel and withdrew a small component, a chipped sensor unit from a derelict freighter. I found this drifting near the fourth moon. Still has some use. As a start, perhaps? Intrigue flickered in the depths of Jax's eyes. He took the sensor, turning it over in calloused hands. All right, he grunted. Deal. Meet me tomorrow at my ship. Sunrise? With that, he stood, an unspoken dismissal hanging in the air. Kix scuttled back to his own table, barely containing a surge of triumph. The transaction knowledge for a potential profit was familiar, comfortable. Yet, he knew this was different. He was bartering not just for information, but for a chance to glimpse the inner workings of a species that had turned the galaxy on its head, all without firing a single shot. Word of Kix's bargain with the humans spread like wildfire through the shimmering scales. Disapproval hung heavy in the air. Zorak confronted his fellow cracks, a note of betrayal edging his usually measured voice. You encourage this? Madness! Humans are disruptive. They must be observed, controlled, not understood. The Thoraxian's eyes glittered in the dim light. Control is an illusion, Cracks. Understanding is the true path to power. Remember, the Xylarans thought they controlled the acid beasts until they turned on them. Rock scoffed, his bulk dwarfing the two insectoids. You talk like a soft-shelled Philian, Thoraxian. Humans are brutes. Only thing they understand is a fist. Or perhaps they understand too much, the Thoraxian rumbled. And that is what scares you, yes? The Globar bristled, but an uncomfortable silence settled over the group. The traders had built their lives on calculated transactions, on careful assessments of risk and reward. The humans, with their penchant for turning tools into weapons and fear into curiosity, were an anomaly, a glitch in their system. Meanwhile, at the break of dawn, Kix tentatively approached Jax's battered ship. The human was already there, crouched beneath the engine nacelle, a wrench clenched in his grimy hand. Seeing Kix, he paused, his expression unreadable. Payment in advance, he grunted, gesturing at the sensor unit Kix had offered. Kix placed the component on the dusty ground, his mandibles clicking nervously. And what do I get today? Jax smirked, a flicker of sardonic humor twisting his lips. Today, you get to work. Fetch me that hydro spanner. He pointed at a cluttered tool crate. And try not to blow anything up. The first lesson, it turned out, was not about the grand mysteries of the human mind, but about the intricate language of mechanics. Kix, accustomed to delicate manipulations and haggling over minuscule margins, found himself immersed in a world of brute force and stubborn machinery. He watched wide-eyed as Jax diagnosed a failing system not through advanced scanners, but by the timbre of a faltering hum, the subtle scent of ozone and a hard whack against a recalcitrant pipe. Days bled into cycles as Kix became Jax's unlikely apprentice. Mornings were spent amidst the groan and hiss of the ship's aging systems. Jax taught him the names and functions of components Kix had only seen in manuals, the feel of worn metal, the precise strikes that coaxed life back into bulky engines. In the hushed evenings within the shimmering scales, they moved from mechanics to the murkier realm of philosophy. Jax, contrary to the expectations of the other patrons, was no battle-hungry berserker. Instead, he spoke of resourcefulness, adaptation, and the grim pragmatism of a species born on a world always teetering on the brink of disaster. We didn't conquer the stars, Jax said one evening, the Grax flower brew leaving a fiery trail down his throat. We clawed our way out of the muck, one broken tool at a time, every generation just trying to survive a little longer to get a little further. Kix, his exoskeleton shimmering faintly in the dim light, leaned forward. But that drive, it scares others. Makes you seem unpredictable. Jax's laugh was short, bitter. Unpredictable is better than dead. Galaxies full of forgotten species who thought they had all the answers. Turns out the universe doesn't care much for plans and protocols. As time wore on, Kix began to understand. Humans weren't born warriors, but they were eternal survivors. Their weapons weren't a manifestation of bloodlust, but the outward expression of their unyielding spirit. They viewed the galaxy not as a battlefield to dominate, but as one endless cosmic puzzle to be solved. The other traders, however, remained unconvinced. Kix was ostracized, whispered rumors turning from disapproval into veiled threats. The Thoraxian watched it all unfold, a sense of grim satisfaction in his compound eyes. Fear, he understood, was a powerful motivator, and sometimes the greatest challenge came not from external threats, but from within. The confrontation, when it came, was not through a brawl initiated by a drunken glowbar or a pack of angry Filians. It came in the form of a summons, cold, calculated, and delivered through the Crack's Dominion's formal channels. Kix, they claimed, was consorting with a potentially dangerous element, a threat to the delicate balance of interstellar trade. Kix faced the tribunal not with fear, but with a strange kind of honor born out of countless hours spent sweating under Jax's ship, out of lessons learned at the uncaring edge of the human scarred logic. He spoke of the potential, the possibilities, the sheer audacity of the human way of thinking. The judges, high-ranking cracks, stared back impassively, their disdain only fueling Kix's determination. Stripped of his trading credentials, his assets seized. Yet, as he was escorted to the edge of the Crack's dominion, he felt not despair but an odd exhilaration. The Thoraxian caught his determined gaze, and a silent understanding passed between them. To change the galaxy, sometimes one must first be cast out of it. Kix didn't fight his exile. In fact, as the Crack's shuttle whisked him away from the familiar bazaar, the bustling, shimmering scales now a fading speck against the vastness of space, he felt a surge of defiance. He wasn't just some disgraced traitor. He was an experiment, a fragile bridge between his rigid people and the boundless potential embodied by the enigmatic Jax. The shuttle dropped him on a barren planetoid standard Dominion protocol for banishment, minimum supplies, a universal communicator, and the vast indifference of the cosmos. Most exiles succumbed to despair, desperately signaling any passing ship in hopes of a return steeped in shame. Not Kix. The lessons Jax had hammered into him weren't about comfort, but about making do with what the universe flung your way. He spent his first cycles not broadcasting pleas, but scanning frequencies. Jax's ship had a signature, a symphony of failing components Jax kept in working order through sheer force of will. If the human was anywhere within a reasonable jump distance, Kix would find him. Jax unexpectedly had become Kix's purpose, the raw material to build the future his people so desperately needed. While he monitored the void he salvaged, Exile sites were littered with the detritus of the defeated. Broken tech, scraps of rations packaging, even the occasional forgotten tool. It reminded Crack's outcasts why resistance was futile. The galaxy ground you down to nothing. Kix, with Jax's echoes in his mind, saw opportunity. Days into his isolation, he stumbled on a half-buried comm panel in a shallow crater. Cracked, but with some intact wiring. He scavenged a power cell from a rusted emergency beacon, rerouted scavenged bits, and cobbled together a jury-rigged mess. Using old codes learned in his apprenticeship, he began broadcasting a targeted distress call, overlaid on a repeating pattern of seemingly random noise. To the casual scan, it was a malfunctioning unit. To someone who, like Jax, could find the signal within the chaos, it was a beacon. The wait was agonizing. Nights on the planetoid were brutal, the thin air whistling a dirge around his makeshift shelter. He'd stare at the starfield, the shimmering scales just another faint cluster now, and wonder if he'd gambled away his future. Logic said no human, however resourceful, would find this needle in the cosmic haystack. But the human way wasn't about logic, was it? Then, a flicker on his comm panel, a garbled signal worming through the static. Not Cracks, not any species he recognized. His heart, or its insectoid equivalent, hammered against his thorax. Scrambling, he boosted the signal, ignoring the drain on his precious power reserves. The voice that emerged was rough, laced with static, but undeniably human. "About time you got that piece of junk working. Where the stars are, you bug boy?" Kix almost wept. "Jax," he hissed into the mic, "listen closely." The rescue, when it came, was pure, glorious chaos. Jax's ship, patched and groaning louder than ever, descended in a whirlwind of dust, breaching every exile planet protocol. The human burst out, toolkit in hand, not even sparing a glance at the shattered comm system. "Kix! I thought those Cracks idiots turned you into spare parts." He clapped a dusty hand on the insectoid's shoulder, then paused, sensing a change. "This ain't some rescue, is it? You look like you got a plan." Kix skittered back, a surge of newfound purpose coursing through him. "A plan? Yes." He clicked his mandibles in agitation. But bigger than the both of us. Jax, I understand now. Humans, you're not just survivors, you're evolution speeded up. Dangerous, yes, but we got the potential to drag you kicking and screaming into a better future. Yeah, got that speech a few times, Jax smirked. But beneath his calluses there was a spark mirroring Kix's excitement. What followed was a whirlwind. Kix, his knowledge of Crack's formality a surprising asset, bartered salvage tech on the fringes of the Dominion for basic supplies. Jax, leveraging that ever-present fear of the human unknown, managed to get grudging tolerance from a few independent traders sympathetic to the crazy bug the humans got as a pet narrative. They established a hidden outpost on a resource-rich, uncharted asteroid. It was harsh, brutal, the kind of existence that would break any cracks. But Kix thrived, applying Jax's lessons with ruthless efficiency. Every breakdown wasn't a failure, but a puzzle. Every scarcity forced a new, ingenious solution. Word, of course, spread back to the shimmering scales. It arrived not on official channels, but the whisper network of the traders. The outcast and the human weren't just surviving. They were building. Fear gnawed at the Crack's elders, Rock's bluster now undercut with doubt. The Filians debating whether to exploit this development or bury the knowledge. Only the Thoraxian, eyes gleaming, seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. Kix, meanwhile, had a new request for Jax during one of their infrequent comms. Data. I need everything. Star charts, Dominion fleet movements, trade manifests. Not to attack them, yet, but to understand how they think. Jax, from the grimy cockpit of his ship, grinned. I got a guy out on Hyperion Hub owes me a favor. You like spreadsheets, bug boy? Years unfurled. Kix's outpost wasn't just a refuge, but a laboratory. He studied the data Jax risked his life obtaining, cross-referencing it with his own insider knowledge of Crack's psychology. Cracks were predictable, bound by hierarchy and protocol. Humans were not. He began devising counter-tactics, disruptions not meant to cripple the Dominion, but to tweak its trajectory. A mysterious malfunction on a remote fuel depot caused a ripple of delays, forcing a Crack's fleet to divert from suppressing a minor uprising on the fringe. A cleverly leaked bit of false data sent a Filian trade group chasing a non-existent profit, leaving an independent world with a sudden influx of resources that shifted the local balance of power. Jax, his initial skepticism fading, became a scalpel wielded with newfound precision, guided by Kix's insights. The Dominion, lumbering and rigid, stumbled, not into collapse but into uncertainty. Their protocols, honed over centuries, suddenly seemed insufficient. Whispers turned from fear of the humans into fear of something more insidious, doubt in the old ways. Back in the shimmering scales, the atmosphere had changed. Kix's name was a curse spat by traditionalists, yet muttered with a hint of desperate curiosity by the younger traders. The Thoraxian, now impossibly ancient, was seen as an oracle, his pronouncements on the shifting galactic landscape treated as prophecy. It amused him and terrified him in equal measure. Change was coming, and it bore the scent of ozone, grease, and relentless insect clicks echoing from the farthest edge of exile. News of the exile's folly, as the Crack's High Council dismissively called Kix and Jax's operation, spread like wildfire through the Dominion's underbelly. Whispers on trading floors, coded messages exchanged in back alleys, all spoke of the outcast Cracks and his unpredictable human companion who were defying the established order with audacious cunning. The younger Cracks, burdened by the stifling traditions and yearning for a more meritocratic system, felt a spark of rebellion ignite within them. The Filians, ever hungry for an advantage, saw Kix's exploits as a blueprint for disruption, a way to further their own agendas. Even among the usually subservient drone species, a quiet discontent began to simmer. Meanwhile, Kix, his antennae twitching with the flow of data Jax procured, orchestrated his next move with surgical precision. He targeted a vital cog in the Dominion's war machine, the Zarthan Fuel Depot, a colossal asteroid complex supplying energy for the entire central sector. This time, it wasn't a minor malfunction. Jax, ever the tinkerer, devised a virus that would subtly disrupt the Zarthan's automated control systems. It wouldn't be a fiery spectacle. It would be a slow, agonizing inefficiency, causing delays, rerouting shipments, and ultimately leading to fuel shortages across the sector. The Dominion reacted with predictable outrage. Accusatory fingers pointed towards the shimmering scales, the traditional scapegoat, but the Crack's elders, caught off guard by Kix's audacity, stammered denials. The unease within the council chambers was palpable. This incident was the tipping point. Younger Crack's officers, questioning the leadership's competence, began voicing dissent. Philly trade delegations openly mocked the Dominion's sluggish response. Even the usually docile drone workforce, witnessing the growing supply chain chaos, staged a silent protest, refusing to unload vital shipments. The spark of rebellion had ignited, fueled not by grand speeches or bloody battles, but by the quiet frustration of a system grinding to a halt under the weight of its own inflexibility. However, the path to dismantling the Dominion wouldn't be easy. The High Council, though rattled, still held immense power. They mobilized elite Crack's troops and dispatched them to the Zarthan, determined to crush the source of the disruption. Meanwhile, whispers of a potential alliance reached Kix and Jax on their remote asteroid base. A young Crack's officer, codenamed Cobalt, had emerged as a leader of the dissenters. He advocated for a pragmatic solution, join forces with the outcasts to exploit the Dominion's vulnerabilities and force a renegotiation of the social order. Kix, ever cautious, saw the potential benefits of such an alliance. Jax, however, was wary. Humans and bugs working together? Sounds like a recipe for disaster, he grumbled, fiddling with a malfunctioning sensor panel. We may not be the most comfortable allies, Jax, Kix replied, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. But a weakened Dominion suits both our goals, doesn't it? Jax grunted, a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes. On a dusty screen in front, a schematic of the Zarthan complex pulsed with a faint red glow. The Crack's troops were on their way. This alliance, forged in the fires of rebellion, was about to face its first real test. The Zarthan fuel depot was a sprawling metallic hive of pipes, tanks, and control centers. It was also a testament to Crack's efficiency, rigid, compartmentalized, and ruthlessly effective. The approaching elite forces, armored and bristling with weaponry, were a testament to its other defining trait, unquestioning obedience. Kix and Jax, monitoring the situation from their hideout, knew brute force wouldn't win this one. Jax's virus was doing exactly what it was designed to, cause headaches, not explosions. To tip the scales, they needed both precision and the element of surprise. Cobalt, through coded transmissions, provided the crucial insider knowledge, troop movements, shift changes, even the override codes necessary to sow further confusion within the Zarthan. He'd taken a gamble. If this uprising failed, his life was forfeit. But, like the countless others hungry for change, he saw no future under the current regime. The plan, hatched with a mix of desperation and grudging admiration for each other's peculiar skills, was risky and relied heavily on timing. Virus. Jax had a final tweak, a hidden backdoor that would give him full, albeit temporary, control of the depot's automated systems at a crucial moment. Power surges, false alarms, even minor venting of fuel cells in low-security zones. It would be like an invisible hand wreaking havoc, the distraction. Kix, leveraging his black market contacts, activated a carefully constructed chain. A distress call from a Phillian scout near the Dominion's borders would lure away a portion of the troops. The call had to be convincing enough to create panic, yet not reveal itself as a blatant trap. Infiltration. Cobalt and a small team of his loyalists, armed with knowledge of unguarded passages provided by Kix, would enter the Zarthan under the cover of chaos. Their objective: plant-targeted jamming devices, disrupting communication within the complex. The demonstration. Kix and Jax would broadcast a carefully worded message from their hideout to every frequency available within the Dominion's central sector. It would detail the manipulation of the Zarthan, a failure not of technology but of Crack's arrogance. Its aim: sow doubt in the lower ranks and demoralize the remaining troops. The first two stages went according to plan. Jax's virus puppeteered the vast Zarthan complex with malicious glee, causing a whirlwind of malfunctions that sent Dominion commanders scrambling. The distress call, relayed through multiple cutouts to mimic authenticity, panicked the High Council enough to redeploy a sizable portion of the assault force. Cobalt's squad, however, hit their first major snag. A power fluctuation triggered lockdown in their intended access point. Kix, hunched over his makeshift command console, swore in a tongue no human could pronounce. Adaptability was the key to survival. "Jax," he hissed, "I need eyes on the facility. Can you get your rust bucket in recon range?" Jax snorted. Don't get your pincers in a twist, bug boy. Just finished overcharging the sensor array. His ship, groaning in protest, skimmed dangerously close to the Zarthan, providing a live feed directly to Kix's console. The new infiltration route was audacious, a barely used fuel transfer duct. Cobalt, armed with the live intel, guided his team through the cramped and volatile space. They were gambling, but every gamble so far had paid off. The Dominion's rigid design was backfiring. Its very complexity was its undoing. Then came Stage 4. Kix took a deep, shuddering breath and triggered the broadcast. His voice, electronically filtered and laced with an undercurrent of urgency, echoed over the Dominion's channels. Citizens of the Dominion, we address not those in power, but those who suffer under it. The Zarthan falters not through sabotage or incompetence, but through the arrogance of a system that values control over progress. There was a gasp from Jax. On the sensor feed, Crack's troops had frozen mid-action. Confusion rippled through their ranks. The broadcast continued, ruthlessly dissecting the Dominion's failures, citing incidents only Kix's inside knowledge could reveal. It was a scathing indictment, not of Crack's strength, but of their over-reliance on predictable order. Cobalt's team, finally at their objective, activated the jamming devices. The Zarthan fell silent. The few high-ranking officers left on site were desperately trying to get orders from the High Council while being barraged with garbled reports from panicked troops on the ground. The uprising wasn't about bloodshed. It was about seizing the narrative. And right now, that narrative belonged to a defiant Crack's outcast and a human tinkerer, broadcasting from an unknown asteroid at the edge of the galaxy. Would the Dominion crush the rebellion, reasserting their iron grip? Or was this the beginning of a seismic shift, where the galaxy's most rigid power structure was forced to bend for fear of breaking? The High Council chambers were a scene of abject fury. Never in recent history had the Cracks faced such blatant defiance, and to have it spearheaded by one of their own, it was a humiliation that cut deeper than any battlefield defeat. Yet beneath the rage there was a chilling flicker of fear. Could the unassailable Dominion truly be brought low by a swarm of insects and a single unpredictable human? Retribution was swift and brutal. Orders went out. Cobalt and his followers were declared traitors. The remaining Cracks forces at Zarthan were to regain control, no matter the cost. Philian trade routes were scrutinized, their ships intercepted under the pretense of searching for conspirators. Even the most servile of the drone species were subjected to increased surveillance, every malfunction interpreted as a sign of rebellion. However, the damage was done. The Dominion teetered on the brink. The fuel shortage at Zarthan persisted, sending ripples of disruption outwards. The broadcast, though officially denounced as propaganda, had taken root in the collective consciousness. Even Crack's warriors, conditioned for obedience, found themselves questioning orders, their trust in their leaders wavering. Kix, monitoring the aftermath from his hidden outpost, felt a grim satisfaction. The Dominion hadn't collapsed overnight as he'd secretly hoped, but wounds had been inflicted that wouldn't easily heal. It was time to escalate. A carefully crafted message appeared on the Philian trade networks, a call disguised as a business venture. Seeking partners with access to Dominion territories, discretion and a distaste for stagnation essential. The Philians, ever opportunistic, responded with coded inquiries. From those, Kix selected the most ruthless, a cluster of traitors notorious for double-dealing. It was a dangerous gamble. These weren't allies in the truest sense, but hungry predators who could be aimed at the Dominion's vulnerable underbelly. Jax, meanwhile, went dark. His ship disappeared from tracking systems, leaving the Dominion to search for a ghost. This silence was a weapon in itself, a constant reminder that the human, the embodiment of their greatest fear, could strike from anywhere, at any time. Weeks turned into cycles. The Philian saboteurs, motivated by Kix's intel and a thirst for profit, wreaked havoc on Crack's supply lines. Minor uprisings flared in fringe colonies, spurred on by garbled echoes of the Zarthan broadcast and a growing sense that the Dominion's grasp was weakening. Then came the audacious blow. Jax, using his formidable tinkering skills and a reckless disregard for his own safety, had tapped into a highly classified Dominion communication channel. It wasn't a broadcast this time, but a targeted transmission aimed directly at the High Council chambers and those in their inner circle. The message wasn't a threat, but a demonstration of absolute vulnerability. Jax's gruff voice echoed through the chamber, detailing a critical security flaw in the Crack's flagship design, a flaw that could cripple their entire fleet. It was a bluff, but one backed with enough technical details to sow the seeds of panic. For the first time, defiance wasn't confined to whispers in the underbelly. The Crack's elites faced the cold realization they were being outsmarted. The Council's reaction was chaos barely contained within protocol. Fleets were recalled, fueling plans thrown into disarray, and an undercurrent of paranoia seeped through their ranks. Kix, perched at his console, felt not triumph, but a strange sense of responsibility. Was he shaping a better future, or simply unleashing a destructive force that even he could not control? The answer was unclear. News came in fragments: skirmishes at the borders, internal purges within the Crack's fleet, rumors of the once mighty Thoraxians holding clandestine meetings with delegations from minor species. The Dominion wasn't collapsing, but it was fracturing, its rigid structure struggling to cope with the relentless, formless assault on its stability. On the hidden asteroid, Kix and Jax held a tense council. The Dominion, wounded and desperate, would lash out again, and soon. It was time to move from instigators to leaders, to transform the simmering rebellion into a force capable of not just tearing down the old order, but offering a viable alternative. The outcasts knew they could never rule, not directly. They were symbols of disruption, catalysts for change. The future of the Dominion, if there was to be one, would need new voices. Younger Cracks, like Cobalt, disenchanted with tradition. Filians, perhaps, with their relentless practicality. Even members of the drone species who yearned for something beyond servitude. Change, true and lasting, never comes from a single source. It comes from an uneasy alliance of those desperate enough to risk everything for a chance of something better. And in a galaxy teetering on the brink of chaos, desperation was a currency in high demand. Kix, accustomed to the solitude of exile, now found himself an improbable kingmaker. Delegations came to the barren asteroid not in shows of force, in the quiet desperation of a system imploding around them. There were Filian traitors with eyes narrowed in calculation, young Cracks officers clutching worn data slates detailing the Dominion's vulnerabilities, and even a delegation of the usually unseen drone species. The Xylari, their chitinous forms shimmering with a nervous energy that betrayed centuries of subjugation. Jax, ever the pragmatist, saw a logistical nightmare. "We got enough supplies to feed an army, not host a galactic summit, bug boy." Yet, in his gaze there was a flicker of something new. Not ambition, but the grudging realization that they had created a momentum impossible to ignore. Kix, however, held the trump card: information. With his insider knowledge and the data fed by Jax's daring raids, he was the galaxy's most unlikely strategist. He bartered, cajoled, and ruthlessly prioritized, shaping the incoherent cries of rebellion into a plan as audacious as it was fragile. The goal wasn't domination, but targeted chaos aimed at forcing the Dominion to the negotiation table. The Filians would cripple trade routes, their strikes precise yet deniable. The rebel Cracks would foment unrest within their own ranks, feigning incompetence with a wink for those who knew to look. Even the Xylari had a role to play, disrupting the production centers discreetly, a silent act of defiance with far-reaching consequences. This war wasn't fought on battlefields, but in the shadowy corners of the Dominion's infrastructure. It was a war of 1,000 small rebellions, coordinated with ruthless efficiency by the exiled scholar and the relentless human. And within the gilded halls of the Crack's High Council, the effect was devastating. Every delayed shipment, every garbled communication, every unexplained malfunction was met with accusations, arrests, and a desperate search for enemies both internal and external. The Dominion's strength, its monolithic order, became its greatest liability. News of this unconventional alliance filtered back to the shimmering scales. Among the traitors there was less fear now, and more a sense of the tide shifting. Rock's bluster faltered, the certainty of Crack's dominance replaced by a gnawing anxiety. Even the stoic Thoraxian, his compound eyes gleaming, seemed to acknowledge that this rebellion wasn't a fleeting uprising, but the first tremor of a long-overdue upheaval. Yet, Kix knew a true victory wouldn't come through force. The Dominion needed an alternative, a vision to cling to as the old world crumbled. He tasked Cobalt and the younger cracks with the most dangerous mission of all, drafting a manifesto. It wouldn't be a fiery call for revolution, but a meticulously outlined plan for a more decentralized power structure, a system built on merit and controlled flexibility instead of blind obedience. The human, however, was the wild card. Jax, a reluctant symbol, became a bargaining chip. Kix, ever the strategist, leaked carefully staged rumors of Jax's capture to the High Council. It was a gamble. Offer the Dominion a tangible, if fleeting, victory, while simultaneously reminding them of the ever-present threat the human represented. The response was predictable. A massive task force was dispatched to corner the rebels, bolstered by the promise of finally silencing the elusive human. What they found, however, wasn't the heart of the rebellion, but a diversion. A cleverly rigged asteroid base filled with decoy signals, and just enough resistance to sow confusion and waste precious resources. By the time the Dominion forces regrouped, the manifesto had spread throughout the underbelly, carried by Philian traders and whispered on darkened spaceports. And when they finally stormed the real rebel base, expecting a glorious battle, they found it abandoned save for a flickering console displaying 2 words: checkmate? The rebellion wasn't about winning every fight, Kix had realized. It was about forcing the Dominion to fight on 1,000 fronts, to waste its strength on an unwinnable war of attrition against an enemy that could be anywhere and nowhere at once. In the aftermath, the galaxy held its breath. The manifesto, flawed and hotly debated, provided a spark not just of rebellion but of something the rigid Dominion had forgotten: hope. The cracks in the Dominion's armor were impossible to ignore, and for the first time in centuries the question wasn't if it would change, but how. And at what cost? Kix and Jax, their improbable alliance, solidified in the crucible of galactic upheaval, found themselves adrift. Their purpose, once so sharply defined, now seemed fluid. The galaxy didn't need them to be conquerors, but architects, a task far less suited to their chaotic natures. Perhaps their exile would resume, not out of punishment, but out of necessity. Perhaps they would become advisors to the fledgling council of reformers, offering their outsiders perspective. Or perhaps Jax, ever the wanderer, would coax his battered ship into the uncharted stars again, with Kix, inexplicably, at his side, leaving the echoes of rebellion to reverberate behind them. The galaxy, like those within it, was always in flux, and in the space between the fall of the old and the uncertain rise of the new, an outcast cracked scholar and a relentlessly resourceful human discovered an unspoken truth. Sometimes the greatest act of creation is to light the spark and then step back from the wildfire.